This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, doctoral students, and everyone in between, cultural workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Stephanie Shonekan, who is Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities at University of Maryland, where she is also affiliate faculty in the Department of African American and Africana Studies. She is the author of a number of critical essays on music and the Black studies tradition, with particular focus on the relationship between expressive culture and identity, and is the author of Soul, Country, and the USA, Race and Identity in American Music Culture from 2015, Fela Kuti's Sorrow, Tears, and Blood from 2025, and Race and the American Story, co-authored with Adam Seagrave in 2024. In this conversation, we discussed the place of musicological research in the field, the importance of transnational studies, and the challenges for Black studies in higher ed's contemporary cultural and political moment. Good morning, Stephanie. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you. How are you?
Not too bad. It's a real spring day in the DMV. So, it was 35 this morning, but it's going to be 65 today. So looking forward to that. And semester's winding down and all of that. So first of all, welcome to the Black Studies Podcast. I'm really glad that you made time. I know being the Dean of Arts and Humanities is no small job these days. But I think it's really important to have your voice on here as, not only as someone who's done both chair, faculty, and dean's level work as a Black studies scholar, but also as an ethnomusicologist, which I think is a really underrepresented field inside Black studies. And so I'm really interested to hear your perspective. And so thank you for making the time. You are 49% my boss. And so
that's true, John.
51%.
So this better go well.
Exactly. Well, there's no merit raise at stake, but maybe in the future. Well, let me say, or ask you a question just to get started. We'll talk a little bit about your work and your imagination of the field of Black studies. But I wanted to start with a question that's more personal and just ask, what is it that drew you to the study of Black life? What got your interest in Black studies? And always for me, what keeps you committed to both of those, to studying Black life, to the field of Black studies?
It's a great question. It's one that I think about quite often because of my journey to administration. The question is always, what are you missing by spending so much time in administration? And so that's why I try to stay active in my research, in publications, and also in teaching. I don't get to teach as much, and I don't have to, but I do because I do still think it's critical to continue thinking about and helping our students think about Black life. So I came to this from when I myself was a student, and I was kind of drawn to Black studies. First of all, Black literature. When I was an undergraduate student in Nigeria. I had grown up a child of a Nigerian father and a Trinidadian mother, and I was always really fascinated by the differences in their cultures. My father was a very Igbo man. Igbo folks are one of the ethnic groups in Nigeria, one of the major ethnic groups. And my mother was very, very Trini, and she ended up raising us in Nigeria on her own after they broke up. But for me, it was always a really interesting study of my Nigerianness and my Trinidadianness, or my West Indianness. And I kept wondering about the boundaries of Blackness. How do I define my own identity? I was never quite Nigerian enough for Nigerians, but yet not quite on the Caribbean side either. So when I was an undergrad, I was an English major, and there was one class that was not a requirement, which was a Black diaspora literature class. And I got exposed to, by this time, of course, growing up in a post-colonial country, I was, of course, very immersed in British literature. So all through what we call secondary school, which is high school, we studied Shakespeare and all the British poets and so on. And I only ran into Chinua Achebe towards the end of high school, and of course, I wanted African literature in university, but not only African literature, I also really wanted to study the works of West Indian authors as well as African American authors. So so that was a whole kind of a blossoming for me, because then I could really understand the differences, the distinctions, the different histories, the different journeys, but also see the parallels, understand the parallels in, white supremacy and colonialism and all of that. So, so after undergrad, where I just loved everything that was Black literature, I went on to a master's at the University of Ibadan, which is in Nigeria as well. And there I decided I wanted to study music and literature, and so really got into jazz, and so my thesis was on Langston Hughes and Amiri Baraka side by side with Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis. And
I'm going to have you send me this thesis. This is like right out of my research interest. Anyway.
Lovely. Oh, you and I need some more conversation here, Chad. Maybe lunch in the summer. We should do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I was really interested in not only the Harlem Renaissance and the historical backdrop for both Langston Hughes and Louis Armstrong, but also sort of the awakening in the Black arts movement and Black power with Miles Davis and Amiri Baraka, of course. So also known as Leroy Jones. So so that just was like woof. But there was nobody in Nigeria who could really help me with the music side. I think we had some of the professors were great on the literature side, but not so much on the music side. And so that's what led me to ethnomusicology. But I needed to stay in Black studies, and so that's how it came to be. I went on to a PhD at Indiana University, which arguably has the best ethnomusicology program, at least one that was suited to my background, because it's in folklore. It's in a department of folklore and ethnomusicology, not in the School of Music. So for me, it was just perfect. Even though we had to learn transcription and analysis, and you had to learn how to read music and know how to read it well, with a little bit of music theory, there was much more anthropology in the syllabus, in the curriculum, and that was just perfect for me because of in my interest in culture and history and so on. So that's why I came into Black studies. I've always, up to this point, I had always had a joint appointment in Black studies and music. And so when I came here to Maryland, I immediately found African American studies as well, and I'm an affiliate. Don't have as much time as I'd like to to participate. Yes, but it's important to me that I don't only spend time on the music side, but I also want to spend time continuing to think about the importance of Black studies.
Yeah, just two sort of inside the podcast notes. Ed Pavlich, who's a graduate of the folklore studies, he's also on the podcast.
Oh, no kidding! I have to find Ed's episode.
It's fantastic, and also you mentioned Achebe. Wando Achebe is also on the podcast.
I did see that one.
I was very jealous of Ashley doing that podcast, but we can't fight over everybody.
I know.
It's also a wonderful series, part of the series. So let me sort of follow up then on just thinking about Black studies, because it's a really interesting way to come to come to it. And I was especially interested in hearing you talk about this, cross-Atlantic sort of space that I knew you had negotiated as a scholar. And so I'm interested in how you imagine the field of Black Studies, and I'm thinking of it especially in relation to the origins of the field, which were born sort of with two imperatives. One was the imperative that the study of Black life and the intellectual tradition be represented on college campuses. That was something that disciplines weren't doing, and so student struggle was really to say, like, we need a place to study the tradition. We need a place for Black life to be studied. But there was also that moment of the radicalization of Black liberation struggle, which had pushed away that boundary between campus and community, between study and political prescription. And so there's also that political imperative at the origins of Black studies. And I think there's a tension. People with this question have done different things with how to think about that relationship. But I think that relationship is still like one of the biggest questions of just what it means to do Black studies, and is really revealed in how we imagine the field. And so I want to ask you, what is your portrait of Black studies, and what is your portrait in relation to this tense origin story?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the focus on the origin story. It's something that I really leaned into when I was at the University of Missouri. At the time, I was chair of Black Studies, and I became chair right at the moment where students were really pushing the institution to do better. And by that, they meant Mike Brown had just been killed in St. Louis. They did not have a sense that the institution was paying attention to what was going on just down the road. And of course, Mike Brown was just one of many through the 2000s, right? And before. And also the treatment that they were getting on campus. So it was just a combination of things. And of course, there was a hunger strike, and football players said they weren't going to play. It was just really a special time to be a faculty member, especially an African faculty member, who had read about all of this from the 1950s and 60s, but was actually seeing it happen on campus. So it was a reminder of the reason why Black Studies was important. And so that was really an inspiring moment for me to see an echo of the origins of Black Studies come to life on a campus. As you probably know, John, the movement at Mizzou inspired lots of movements across the different universities across the United States.
Yeah, I was at Amherst College at the time, and some students staged a solidarity event that turned into a complete campus shutdown and really transformed many things. So
absolutely. Yeah, it just really felt like, and this is what I kept telling the administration, this is exactly what students had done back in the day. And what was interesting for me as an African scholar, or a scholar of African origin in that moment, was immediately there were student groups from across campus were joining, right? They were aligning with African American students. And the one group that did not step up very quickly was the African Students Association. And when I asked their advisor, I was like, hey, I don't see any, what's going on here? And, they were not as, I don't know if they were not as moved. They probably were. But what I did was I wanted them to understand that without that movement in the 1950s and 60s by students exactly like this, we wouldn't be here, right? So think very carefully about where you want to what you want to support and where you want to be in this narrative. I'm proud to say that they did step up. But that to me was a reminder. And this is in 2015, right? So it's a reminder that origin story is still very, very needed and very necessary. A lot of people have asked, especially when I was in chair of Black Studies, why we still need Black Studies. Why do we need Black History Month? Why do we need Black Studies? And my response is always that until we can trust, right, that African American and African and Black life will be properly privileged in a department of English or a department of history, which those departments have done a great job in the 20th and 21st century of folding in some Black literature, some Black poetry, all of that. But until we get to a point where we feel really comfortable that African American life will be as valued as other literatures and other lives, we still need Black Studies. We need it. And so that's sort of a roundabout way of saying that in my mind, the origin story and the importance of Black Studies is still very critical. And I love that Black Studies also is interdisciplinary. Here at the University of Maryland, as we know, it sits in BSOS, the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences, as it should and as it can, right? Because we have humanists, we have artists, we have social scientists, we have scientists as well, and so it makes total sense that it would sit in any one of these. It can sit in any one of these colleges, and there are very few other fields or disciplines that can do that.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I'm glad that the struggle at Missouri gets on this podcast. It was a really formative event for so many people.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
Students and just people who follow politics. I mean, it was such an event, and it was an event that's still has a fraught legacy in terms of the varieties of reaction to it. But it was really such an amazing moment of people who weren't in a department of Black Studies doing Black Studies work, athletes refusing to play, right, in the name of racial justice.
And their coach, yeah, exactly.
That was fantastic. But let me ask about your research. You've talked about it a bit, that your work in cultural studies and ethnomusicology, folklore studies. It's such an interesting way of entering the field of Black studies, because as I said before, I do think ethnomusicology is so underrepresented, yet music is such a canonical part of the Black intellectual tradition. It's really like a foundation piece. But I'm interested in how you think about your own research and orientation and methods and critical frames, how you think it fits into the history of the field. Sort of what does it do that the history of the field has done, but also what boundaries do you think it pushes? What new horizons do you think it opens up?
I am completely biased when I say that. I think ethnomusicology is an excellent way of leading students into Black studies. When I teach a class on race and the American story, for example, which is a class and a book that I've developed, it is great to give them primary resources like Notes on the State of Virginia to sit down and read. But when you ask them to also listen to a Louis Armstrong song like Black and Blue or Duke Ellington, Black and Tan, there's so many examples, or Scott Joplin, students get, or even not just students, but even like citizens, right, can get a glimpse into American history and the issues that we're still dealing with. I think in a more immediate way, music to me is arguably more accessible as a text than some other texts. I love all texts, and we want our students obviously to read and think and analyze. But music is a way in. I use it as a way into to knowing more. So if you listen to Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddam, right? And then go ahead and read James Baldwin or Ralph Ellison. You get a fuller picture of what is happening, and then you read some historical texts, or history texts, right? Then you get a fuller picture. I think ethnomusicology, and there are lots of, a good number of really important ethnomusicologists who've been talking about this, like Portia K. Maltby, whose work is, I think, revolutionary and was revolutionary in like 1970s and 80s. So when I got to Indiana and I became I was on the ethnomusicology path, and I was looking for a minor. I was immediately told, "Oh, go to African studies," but I just didn't think I needed to learn more. I always need to learn more, but I didn't want to really focus my doctoral time on African American studies when I needed to learn more about African American studies. So African studies, sure, felt like I'd done it all my life, right? And plus at the time, I'll be honest, John, I felt there were so many. Even at Indiana, where I was, most of the people in African studies were white, and there's the tradition of in African studies of white scholars writing about Africa, and for years there were more texts by white folks than by African folks. So I was just like, you know what, let me hop over to African American studies, because there's such a rich tradition there, and so I think ethnomusicology and my work, I love it. I love what we can do with ethnomusicology. I think that we can think about feminism. We can think about the civil rights movement. We can think about Black Lives Matter. We can think about white supremacy and all of its manifestations through music if we really listen carefully. I will just mention I would argue that one of the most important texts of Africana studies, and of course, lots of Black studies departments are reshaping or redefining themselves as African and African American studies, or including University of Maryland's Black Studies, right? That when we look for a text that can do that can kind of spread itself across the quote unquote Black Atlantic. I would cite Max Roach. His We Insist album of 1960 is a great example of how from my ethnomusicological mind, right, that this text, which is an album, can be a great source for understanding what has happened historically in this country at a visceral level. I mean, that album can do more than in my ethnomusicology mind, can do more to move us, to action or to deeper thought than so many texts. And you and I both write a lot. Our development as professors is built on writing. It's writing text. But listening is a big part of that. And that album is one that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned on this podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, listening and thinking the way sound and thought, are not, sound is not thought to be interpreted, but is its own It is its
Absolutely.
own form of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just anecdotally, I've been for a while teaching a seminar on Angela Davis, and I taught it just this past fall, which was a fantastic class, despite being at 9:30 in the morning, which caused students to think might as well be 5 a.m. But great class, super engaged, and we read Blues Legacies and Black Feminism at the end of the course. And I remember one student saying, because I always say, like, you have to listen to the music. I put a playlist together that goes in sequence to the songs that she discusses. I just went through and just made a playlist.
I want that playlist.
And then one of my students, I just loved this. She just said, Professor Trubinsky's not lying, which is a hilarious way to start a comment. Said, you have to listen to the music, and said, it might be that Angela Davis is just Bessie Smith who read Karl Marx.
Oof.
And I was like, okay, you get an A.
Oh my gosh.
Please still come to class. You don't have to come anymore. Don't worry.
That is amazing.
But it was a testimony to what you're saying, and that you can just as easily follow Davis interpreting the songs. But if you listen, you see that she's not interpreting the songs. She's just in some ways witnessing them and trying to have her own sort of moment with it. And that's not a paradox, but that complexity of writing about music. But
is this an undergraduate class, John?
yes, yeah.
Wow.
I would love to teach it as a graduate course. I just have not had
that would be a great graduate seminar.
Let me see if I can make that happen. Well, let me just sort of follow up on that, just a short little question. How do you think your own work as an intellectual has been influenced by the fact that you haven't come to your writerly and teaching life through a discipline? Because that's what's really striking to me, that you haven't spent time, you weren't first a history professor who then became Black Studies. What is that? I mean, I don't know if you've reflected on what it means to have never really worked through a discipline. You always worked in these, I know ethnomusicology is a kind of discipline, but
we like to think so.
In folklore studies, it's different.
Yeah. So this is why I think Indiana was the best place for me. There are other places, other ethnomusicology programs in the United States that are more music oriented, as in the practitioner, right? You run an ensemble, you teach African drumming, that type of thing. That was not the kind of program that I was in. I came up in a program where we had anthropology classes, folklore classes. We learned about mythology and folk tales, and all kinds of really interesting things. And then we followed the path of Alan Lomax, and all of that. So it was just a really rich, you're right, just sort of open space in which to kind of dip into different disciplines and come out with, we did field research, we did interviews, we did participant observation, all of that, right? And yet we still had to transcribe what we heard, in terms of music on the score, and think about other ways of transcribing music that wasn't the Western canon. So it just was, for me, it was just so open. And honestly, John, I think that made me, I think for a while I felt intimidated by not having the music knowledge, the deep musical knowledge. But then I became, as I grew in my scholarly identity, I became really comfortable with just being who I was, and I think that's what made me also a good administrator, right? Because in 2025, we have to think about how we can come out of our silos and work across disciplines. Our students, the student that you just talked about was thinking expansively about music and Bessie Smith and Marxism, which could be in political science, or philosophy. They're our students, and we ourselves, are human beings that our brains want to dip into all kinds of knowledges, all kinds of truths with a small t. And so I think that my upbringing as a scholar has allowed me to, I just wrote a small book, one of those 33 and a third books on an album. I've just written a small one on Fela Anikulapo Kuti, which is a little bit different from some of the other books in that series. And that series is published by Bloomsbury. Mine is very much about the history of Nigeria and what was happening in Nigeria at that time. I had to bring in some political science texts, some history texts. I had to, of course, do the musical analysis as well. But it just allows me to be free. And I do think that that's useful for me now as Dean of a College of Arts and Humanities to, and also as a dean who's working with the Dean of BSOS or the Dean of the Info School, or computer science, to imagine even new majors, that allow our students to really immerse themselves in the humanities or even in the arts and computer science, a discipline in the humanities, and let's say AI, medicine. That's where I think my background has kind of led me to.
Yeah, one more podcast mentioned one of our mutual colleagues, Marissa Parham's podcast had come out on Monday, and she went into real depth about the sort of what it means to think disciplines together and how much imagination and study it requires. But also, I think what I hear in so much of what you've said in this conversation, the immense pleasure of that, because you use that word free, and I really responded to that. It was like, we really do live in worlds of unfreedom, and it's nice to have this really beautiful freedom of listening, thinking, writing, for some of us playing, not me or you, but
Exactly.
Well, let me ask as a one of two final questions. This is about thinking about the field of Black Studies. What do you think that Black Studies has done particularly well as a field of study, and what do you think it has not done particularly well?
Yeah, this is another great question that I've thought about a lot. What Black Studies has done well is that it has stayed up, it is still here. It is still very, very strong. It is still extremely relevant. It is still what we reach for when we are thinking about disability studies. It's still what we reach for when we're thinking about women, gender, and sexuality studies. It is the basis, to really understand legal studies, all kinds of threads that come out of Black Studies. I think Black Studies has really, the roots of Black Studies are so strong and sustainable and will continue on I have no doubt it will continue on despite what is happening.
We can leave it at that.
Yeah, it is really a strong intellectual history right there. So I think that's what it's done well. What it has not done well, and this is tough for me to say because I love it so much and I'm so Black Studies myself, is that we haven't done a good job of building a bridge between the sort of pioneers of the field and new scholarship. I think there have been so many great new names, right, in Black Studies that are doing some really interesting things that the mothers and fathers of the field, if they were to look now at what's happening, they'd be like, huh? Because the field has developed so much, this interdisciplinary field has developed so much that it has produced some exceptional thinkers. I'm thinking of people that we may or may not agree with their work, their conclusions all the time. So people like Frank Wilderson and Christina Sharp and Saidiya Hartman. I mean, these are people who are doing work that is so different than the work that was produced in the 1950s or 1960s. And I don't think we've done a good job of bridging that gap. I think if you've sat in a African American Studies department for any period of time, you see the chasm between the sort of earlier scholarship and the new scholarship. And all we need to do, I'm saying all we need as if it's easy, but but we do need to do a better job of connecting them. We wouldn't be here without the pioneers, right? And the pioneers need to understand how the contemporary scholars are just as important as a response to what is happening right now. So I think that's what I would say we could do better.
I like that. I think that part of what Ashley and Bree and I are trying to do with this podcast is to produce in that way some sort of raw material to work with, sort of how, here are some because the generation differences in these podcasts have been real, and those can be productive or they can just be sort of silent. So I love that idea. One last question, and this is, since you're an administrator, so leadership statements are sort of your forte. What do you think is the issue that we should all be thinking about, or what is the question you would want us to all be asking?
I think the question that we should all be thinking about is, what lessons can we take from the establishment of Black Studies, the successful pushback against silencing of Black Studies? What lessons can we take from the 50s and 60s and apply to where we are right now? I think there's such great lessons. We just had a wonderful panel yesterday in Arhu where we were talking about transness and this moment in American history. And, I couldn't but think about some of the excellent scholars in the past who have helped to educate not only the academy, but beyond the academy. So pull up any James Baldwin interview that he did, or any debate he did, and take those lessons and apply them to what's happening right now. I think those are the questions that we should be asking. How can we learn from Black Studies in the academy?
I love that. Perfect place for us to conclude. It's take classes, read, think, and discuss about
Amen.
So thank you so much. I mean, this is a real treat and a wonderful contribution to the series. Your perspective is really interesting and important. And so thank you for your time, and really thank you for your real thoughtfulness in this. This has been fantastic. John. I've really loved it. So thank you so much.
Me too. Thanks, John. And I'm going to go back and listen to some of the other episodes, and I'm looking forward to Marissa's, because that's my colleague. I want to see what she has to say.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.